Halo Survival, a fan-made audio drama produced by Podcast Evolved. Episode 6, Zeta Halo.
Clear right!
O'Neill shouted as he moved around the corner of the metallic structure with his BR-55 raised. O'Neill used the side-mounted flashlight on his rifle to illuminate the room ahead as he advanced into it. The room was a large, hollow space with a few blue lights decorating it, and what appeared to be some kind of console mounted on one wall, with ancient Forerunner hieroglyphs planned within. The Marines weren't sure what the purpose of the structure was, but its angular tower emitted a blue pulse into the sky every now and then, suggesting it was part of some kind of network. They were sure that Talbot would have loved the finer details, but they were lost on the Marines. They just wanted some shelter. Weisner moved in behind with a CQS-48 shotgun raised. He lowered the weapon and then reached up to his helmet, tapping his comms device to activate it.
Complex secure, Sarge. You and Vorstock can come on in.
O'Neill and Wisner set about placing their weapons down against the wall as they began to assess the space. Weisner reached into one of the pouches on his vest and pulled out some kind of energy bar, peeling back foil as he bit hungrily at it. He finished it and slung the MA-40 he was also carrying off his back and began the process of field stripping it. O'Neill was now sat doing the same with his BR-55. Vorstock walked in with her BR-55 slung across her chest, and the sergeant came in the rear, with her DMR slumped on her back as she drank some water from a canteen.
What's the situation?
Well, it ain't no sundown, but it'll do, Sarge.
It's close quarters. We can't stay here for long. If the Banish were to catch us in here, it'd be like shooting fish in a barrel.
We don't have many good options right now. We just gotta make the best of a bad situation. Hunker down and get some sleep, Marines. It'll be nightfall soon. I'll take the first watch.
Hull went back outside to a ramp which they had passed as they cleared the Forerunner structure, and she climbed it, emerging on a platform which surrounded the apex of the emitter tower. She walked to the edge and sat, her DMR nestled across her legs as she looked out towards the rich and expansive landscape of the ring. Across, in the trees, she could see some animals which weren't too dissimilar to deer found on Earth moving about as a pack, harmlessly calling out to each other as they went. They glowed with a vibrant bioluminescence as they moved, and she found herself mesmerized by these peaceful animals. Birds could still be seen in the night sky, and in the distance, the lights of the Phantom dropships can be seen going to and fro, thick spotlights searching where Sheath assumed the wreckage of the Prowler was now slumped. As she watched, she removed the magazine from her DMR, checked the rounds, and then placed it back in, thumbing the safety. Some time passed, and eventually, Vorstock came up to take on Overwatch. The pair nodded to each other, and Hull headed back down into the structure, where the other Marines were fast asleep. She slumped down in an exhausted heap, and finally let the darkness wash over her as she fell into a restless, haunted sleep.
Sarge! Wake up! Sarge!
Her eyes opened and took a moment to adjust to the light in the room. There was a hissing noise, and it took a moment for her to realize that it was static coming from a radio in O'Neill's hand.
A signal came through on the UNSC emergency band. No words, but it sounds like someone is nearby.
Holt sat up and looked at the Marines in front of her. O'Neill and Weisner were staring at her, eager-eyed and waiting to see what she wanted to do next. She weighed her options over in her mind. On the one hand, she could attempt to contact the signal source, but this may lead to their location becoming compromised, and that would mean that they'd have to find an exfil in a hurry. On the other hand, if there was a UNSC force left in the area, then she might be able to spot a sign of their location if they were to climb out of the valley and recon the surrounding areas from one of the mountain tops nearby. She weighed out the pros and cons of both options. A 4-man recon team wouldn't be fantastic, so she'd have to leave some of the Marines behind But it would also mean they would need a secure location to return to if the signal was a trap. It seemed like the most logical option.
Wisner, get Vorstock. We're splitting up.
A few moments later, all 4 Marines were in the room together.
The plan is simple. We're going to split into 2 teams. O'Neill and I will head to one of the peaks of the local mountain ranges. I've got some binos and also the DMR. Using them, we'll recon the local area and see if we can locate any UNSC forces who the signal may have originated from. Vorstock and Wisner, you'll stay here. We'll leave most of our equipment so we can move quickly. If we find the source, we'll come back and collect you. If not, we'll come back, pack up, and we'll get ready to move out on our own terms.
But didn't you say this location wouldn't be safe for long?
It won't. But it's secure for now, and the recon op won't take long. We'll get to the location, avoid the banish, and be back before sundown. If we're not, you move on without us.
Why me? Nat's better at longer range work.
Exactly. So she is the perfect person to help Wisner keep watch while we're gone. That way, we keep everyone safe.
The Marines nodded, Holt seemingly settling their concerns. Wisner and Vorstock walked their comrades to the door, and then watched as the 2 Marines gently sprinted away into the woodland. Holt wasn't sure what they were going to find, but if they kept moving in a north direction, she knew they would come to the mountain ranges she could see on the horizon, and from there, they would be in a much better position to ascertain the circumstances on the ring. Her and O'Neill slowed into a slow jog as they began to move through the woodlands. They made sure to keep a wide arc around the field that they came from, knowing that Banished would likely still be entrenched around the crash site. It pained Holt to know that Cooper and Talbot's bodies were probably in Banished possession, but there was nothing she could do about it now. As the recon team continued to move through the woodland, they occasionally heard the whoosh of a banshee flying overhead. Now and then, they would also hear the discharge of Banished weaponry in the distance, followed by eerie stillness. It was clear that their alien attackers were making their presence felt on the ring. But Holt was hopeful that the UNSC reinforcements they were bound to find soon would help them repel this small incursion and avenge the death of her friends. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of running, the 2 Marines emerged at the rocky outcrop of the lower end of one of the mountains. The terrain became increasingly volatile and difficult to navigate, so the Marines had to sling their weapons on their backs to begin to scale the rock face. Eventually, it became more vertical than horizontal, and the Marines took a moment to catch their breath, eating rations and drinking water.
It's damn high, and that terrain looks lethal. We'll have to take our time.
Hey, it was your idea in the first place, Sarge.
At the Forerunner structure which the Marines had temporarily occupied, Vorstock was pacing back and forth on the observation platform, her BR-55 in hand. She didn't like that there were only 4 of them left on the ring, and she certainly didn't like the fact that the sergeant had decided to go and investigate that signal. They needed backup, but investigating something so strange was bound to be dangerous, and she wasn't entirely convinced that it would have originated from a UNSC source. Still, Holt was left in charge, and she had to follow her orders, even if she did work better alone. She was deep in her own thoughts when a scream came from deep inside the compound. It took her a moment to realize that this had been Wisner. As quickly as she heard him, things fell silent, and she felt a chill run down her back. She checked her rifle and turned, moving back into the inner workings of the Forerunner structure. She raised her rifle and cleared the corners quickly until she came to the room where the Marines had holed up. Wisner lay on his back, and as she got closer, it became quite clear that the poor Marine was dead. Something had sliced through his stomach, and it was clear that it had been hot and fast as it left a near-perfect vertical slit in his torso. She could see internal organs through the bloodied pulp and knew instinctively what had done this. An energy sword, a weapon favored by the Sangheli, and a weapon which could kill in a single blow. She could see that Wisner's bulldog shotgun lay next to him, just out of arm's reach. She found a small bit of comfort in knowing that her friend, at the very least, tried to fight back. There was a click as something hit the floor behind her, and she turned to see an empty corridor. But as her sight adjusted, she realized that something wasn't right. In the middle of the corridor, the empty air almost appeared to be shimmering. She didn't hesitate and fired 3 rounds in quick succession, impacting against the figure which stood there. At once, there was an alien sound, and 2 red blades quickly became visible, energy sizzling against the air as the hostile shields recharged, and its outline disappeared once more. She once again began to fire, but at this point, the creature had lunged forward and plunged the sword deep in her stomach. She moaned in agony as the BR-55 cluttered to the floor, and she fell back against the floor. She could feel her body becoming numb, but she didn't want to give up so easily. After all, she had been trained to take the enemy down with her. She reached around to the back of her utility belt, where a grenade was mounted, and pulled it to her front, desperately attempting to thumb the safety off of the weapon, despite the failing sense of feeling in her fingers. She was almost there, when the feeling dropped away altogether, along with her hand and the other half of her forearm. She looked down, more in shock than any real horror, and saw the grenade and some of the bloody remains of her arm drop to the floor in a mess. She turned, mouth agape, beginning to gurgle on blood as her eyes began to force themselves closed. For a moment, she saw a towering black figure with a red visor look down at her, almost in pity, and then everything went black. Across the ring, O'Neill and Holt were blissfully unaware of Vorstock and Wisner's fates, with no way to contact their fallen Marines. As the duo reached the peak of the rock work which they had spent some time climbing, they were able to get the view out across the ring, showing them everything from the crash site where the Prowler had come down, to further afield than they could see before. As they began to take in the view, both their faces dropped, and O'Neill's usually charming demeanor dissolved entirely. Waves of banished vehicles could be seen across the ring, including phantoms and banshees patrolling the skies, and armor columns of wraiths, marauders, and other vehicles picking their way through the fields. Foot soldiers could be seen everywhere, and large structures dotted on the horizon resembling old-school fortresses, with defensive walls, watchtowers, and other nasty-looking fortifications wrapped around them. On the hills and mountains in the distance, large banished structures could be seen reaching towards the skyline, including what appeared to be barracks, and also a string of anti-aircraft cannons set up in defensive formation. Here and there, the former remnants of UNSC forces could be seen, still smoking in some places. Old bases had been destroyed and vehicles abandoned. It was becoming painfully clear that the signal hadn't heralded a last bastion of human resistance, but rather it had heralded the arrival of something far, far bleaker.
This isn't an incursion. It's an invasion.
You have been listening to Halo Survival, a fan-made audio drama produced by Podcast Evolved and narrated by Henry Paul David. The voice of Captain Chris Cooper was performed by Cam 4K Studios. The voice of Sergeant Maria Holt was performed by Kirsty for Halo. The voice of Private Matthew Wisner was performed by Matthew Keel. The voice of Private Dan O'Neill was performed by Demetrius Hazel. The voice of Dr. Nate Talbot was performed by William Boyer. The voice of Private Natalie Vorstock was performed by Samantha Endrist. Guest starring Brad Jost and Tim Piper.
Halo Survival was written by Thomas Fishenden and Colin Perkins. Audio drama created using assets from the Halo video games, and music from both the games and the podcast Evolved original album. Thank you for listening, and evolve.
Hi everyone, it's Tom here at the end of the show, and I wanted to say a huge thank you for listening to and supporting this audio drama. We hope that you are just as excited for Halo Infinite as all of the crew here at Podcast Evolved are. This audio drama was created as a letter of love for the team at 343 Industries, allowing us to tell our own story in the beautiful world which they have been crafting for the upcoming video game. Thank you for keeping Halo alive for all of the fans. We are incredibly excited for the next 10 years of Halo. I want to say a special thank you to all of the voice actors, from everyone from the cast, to also Henry Poole, who was the narrator. You all really put a lot of energy into this drama, and it's incredibly humbling to have you all as a part of this. So thank you so much to everyone involved, and thank you to you, the listener. We appreciate you listening, and, as always, evolved.